Hi everyone, I'm Ashley McManus, Senior Director of Global Marketing at SmartEye. Welcome to the Human-Centric AI podcast, where each episode we feature thought leaders doing cutting-edge work in the AI space. A little about us. For over 20 years, SmartEye has developed AI in the form of eye-tracking technology that understands, supports, and predicts a person's intentions and actions. By carefully studying eye, facial, and head movement, our tech can draw conclusions about a person's awareness and mental state. Our eye-tracking technology is used in the next generation of cars, commercial vehicles, and providing new insights for research within aerospace, aviation, neuroscience, and more. We have a very special episode today featuring Dr. Rana el Kaliouby, former co-founder and CEO of Affectiva, currently Deputy CEO of SmartEye, speaking with Elizabeth Bramson-Boudreau, the Chief Executive Officer and Publisher of MIT Technology Review. Elizabeth leads the growth, expansion, and modernization of the review's media platforms and products. She also serves as the chairman and president of MIT Enterprise Forum, a nonprofit organization with chapters worldwide. Prior to this role, Elizabeth was the global managing director of the Economist Corporate Network. Dr. Rana el Kaliouby is a scientist, entrepreneur, and an AI thought leader on a mission to humanize technology before it dehumanizes us. She is formerly the co-founder and CEO of Affectiva, an MIT spinoff and the category-defining AI company. She is also an executive fellow at the Harvard Business School, where she teaches about AI and startups. Elizabeth and Rana had a great conversation on how technology can still be a force for good, and how journalism can help keep companies accountable and help them deliver on their promises. Let's listen in to learn more.
Hello, and welcome to our LinkedIn Live conversation, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Bramson-Boudreau. I'm the CEO and publisher of MIT Technology Review, and I am privileged to have Rana el Kaliouby, Deputy CEO of SmartEye, joining me for this wonderful conversation today. Hi, Rana.
Hi, Elizabeth. How are you doing?
I'm great. So I am here in Newton. Rana, I think you're in Cambridge. Is that right?
I'm in Milton, just outside of Boston.
Okay, fantastic. But Rana, I would love for you to tell everybody here a little bit about SmartEye and Affectiva, which was a spinoff from the MIT Media Lab. And I would love it if you would introduce yourself and who you are and what you're doing.
Thank you, Elizabeth, for having me here. And hi, everybody, from wherever you are. I'll start by introducing myself. And then, Elizabeth, I really want to know more about you and what you do at MIT Tech Review as well. So, my background is in computer vision and machine learning. I grew up around the Middle East, so I did my undergraduate at the American University in Cairo, then my PhD at Cambridge University. And then I came to MIT as a postdoc, initially wanting to become faculty, but very quickly realizing that the technology I was building had huge commercial potential. And so we spun out of MIT in 2009, my company Affectiva. And it's been an incredible journey over the last 12 years to essentially bring emotional and social intelligence to technology. We really, we're on this mission to humanize technology. And we believe that, the natural human-machine interface is going to become conversational, perceptual, empathetic, emotional. And there are so many applications of this technology. And, my experience at MIT has really shaped the work I do. And I'm sure, as the CEO of Tech Review, you see a lot of innovations, Elizabeth. So, that's my background. Very excited to be here. I'm very curious for us at Affectiva, the partnership between media and what we do was so incredibly important to, just bringing people along the way with, on board with our journey and just understanding what our technology is about and the use cases and the ethical implications. So excited to be doing this with you. And let's start with your background. How did you end up at MIT Tech Review?
Well, I mean, I have lots of things to ask you about, Rana, but quickly, I'll just say I joined MIT Technology Review about 5.5 years ago. I'd been at The Economist living in the UK and moved back to the US with due to family, priorities, and it was kind of time to get home, so to speak, and joined Technology Review at a time when it was clear that there was a lot more potential to this brand and the voice that MIT Technology Review could have in the technology media space. And so I was really excited to take that on, and it's been a journey. It's been an incredible journey. So we're doing lots of things. Those of you who joined right at the start saw a sizzle reel and a promotion for a cyber security event that we have next week. There's just so many things. We've got a podcast. We've got actually a couple podcasts. We've got a print magazine, of course, but really what we do is lots of just constant storytelling and promotion of really tremendous tech journalism through our website, which is at technologyreview.com. So I hope those of you who haven't visited us in a little while will do that. But Rana, speaking of partnerships, just very quickly, I want to talk about, so Technology Review has had a list of the 35 innovators under 35, under the age of 35, for a bunch of years, 20-something years, way before I joined here. And you were on that list in 2012. And that's, that maybe that dates you, maybe that tells a little too much about
right. I'm not still under 35.
You might just need to say on the list at some point in the past. Maybe we start to hide the year, actually. But what I'm interested in is if you could tell us a little bit about I know more about the Affectiva than probably most people do. But what I'm interested in, what does this mean, this sensing AI, and what are some of the use cases? How could it be used in an office situation? How could it be used in a home situation? Give us a couple of just quick snapshots.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually the MIT Tech Review, 35 under 35, that was really transformative for me as an innovative entrepreneur. It was, a few years into spinning out of MIT, and it's a very credible list. I remember being listed, alongside a lot of the, CEOs and founders of the big tech companies that we all live and breathe every day. So it's an amazing opportunity to highlight innovators. And that's one thing, MIT does really well. So Affectiva, our core technology, I guess our core hypothesis is that a lot of AI, which is becoming mainstream and it's taking on roles that were traditionally done by humans, and it's really impacting almost every aspect of our lives. A lot of the emphasis, though, on building these AI technologies is on the IQ, the cognitive intelligence of these devices or systems. And if you look at human intelligence, our emotional and social intelligence is really key. Our ability to empathize, our ability to understand other people's emotional states and tap into that, that's really important. And I felt that it was really missing from technology. And so I've been on this mission over the last 20 years to bring emotional intelligence to our machines. So many use cases, everything from autism, which is the very first application I explored as a postdoc at MIT, all the way to advertising research, to automotive, making sure our cars are safer, to mental health. It's an area that Affectiva didn't really do a lot of work in, but it's something that I'm very passionate about. So, I really believe that eventually this is going to become the de facto human-machine interface. But that opens up a lot of, questions around the ethics of all of this. How do we want to design it? How do we want to deploy it? So,
yes, actually, it's interesting you mentioned that, because we just had a question come in from someone in our audience that I think is very pertinent. The question is, how can tech companies better measure the success of virtue, not just profits and losses, or call it ethics? How do we build technology that takes into consideration the human element? Not in the technology way that you're talking about, but rather, this is a technology that's going to impact people's lives, and where are creators and designers of new technologies such as yourself finding the answers? And it's a thorny problem that rests in a lot of data issues, as you know. Tell us more.
Yeah, so I actually really, I don't know if you're seeing more of that, but I think as leaders, as tech innovators and leaders, I think we have to widen the scope. So the World Economic Forum has this incredible framework called the Responsible Leadership Framework, and they outline a number of tenets of this framework, and one of them is stakeholder interest, right? And it broadens the view or definition of a stakeholder. It's not just your investors or your employees or your customers. It's really society at large, or the communities that you are in. And so I think ethics of AI has become a business, or ought to be a business issue, and not just something that's an afterthought you think about at the very end of your product, design's life cycle. For us, that meant two things. We think about data and algorithmic bias from the get-go, and also we think about where do we want to deploy our technology and where do we not deploy the technologies. For example, we don't do any work in security and surveillance and lie detection because we feel that infringes on people's privacy and it's rife with opportunities to discriminate against people. So that's how we've tackled it. I want to ask you the same question, Elizabeth. What are you seeing, in terms of new technologies that are coming out? Are they thinking about ethics from the get-go, or is it just focused on profit? And also, I guess, the role that media has to play in highlighting the issues.
Yeah, it's it's very much the question of the time. What is the role that media needs to play in kind of watchdogging technology or policing or whatever the verb is? We've done a lot of reporting at Technology Review about the importance of ethical creation of new technologies, the AI technologies. We've done a lot of reporting on places where major technology companies such as Facebook have made certain choices rather than others in the pursuit of growth in the case of Facebook. So we did a great big, very intensively reported piece. It took the reporter Karen Howe something like 9-10 months to dig into the AI algorithms and the way they are built and constructed. And really she uncovered several months ago, was one of the first reporters to really kind of explode the analysis of the algorithm and the prioritization that is made at Facebook to look after growth rather than the less positive consequences of the pursuit of that growth. And that, that's a place where MIT Technology Review, I think, is very special and valuable. And we're trying to really emphasize that in the way that we communicate with our audience. Because we are MIT, we have a very different kind of special sauce in our reporting. So in the case of our reporters, there's computer science majors from MIT. In the case of Karen Howe, folks with really deep technology backgrounds who are also very well networked and connected within the MIT academic ecosystem. We're independent from MIT, but our access is really unequaled because of our relationship to the mothership, so to speak. So we're trying to really bring that to light because there are lots of these questions that you can see things like congressional testimonies and questions from our policymakers. And when really those folks are, with all due respect, kind of wading into waters that they don't know how to swim in. And therefore, a lot of this stuff has to go unchecked unless good journalism can break it apart. And so that's what we're really focused on, and we're really trying to get out front when people think about who we are.
Can I ask you a question? Because this kind of investigative journalism in technology is relatively new, right? Mm-hmm. And so what was it like before that? I mean, what was like the coverage of technology like before this tech backlash? Yeah,
I mean, so, those folks who are, on the editorial side of Technology Review, I'm not, I'm the publisher, can really break apart kind of the chronology, but essentially, you had sort of lots of people who were writing about new technologies. I mean, talk back in the 80s and the 90s, and, this device or that device, this laptop versus that laptop, and a lot of look at all the stuff that the emergence of the computer enables, right? And so it's a lot of device oriented or machine focused reporting. And then there became, obviously we had the .com bubble and lots of excitement around look at the internet. The internet's so big, it's going to do all these great things. And in the last 20 years, there's been both a real rah Silicon Valley, all this wealth creation, all this company growth coming out of the Silicon Valley, but not just Silicon Valley, also here in the greater Boston area, et cetera, that tended to be really tech enthusiasts, technology will save the world, and et cetera and so forth. And then we got to a place where 2016, probably some would argue before that, where we realized, holy moly, and that's a more polite word than I might use. What have we wrought here? You have Cambridge Analytica scandal. You realize how much the social networks that have proliferated in the massive power of a Facebook. You realize how it's unfettered, uncontrolled, and that the prioritization has not been on kind of the social good or the social impact. And then you see also how little is considered in things like the carbon impact of new technology. So I think we went to this sort of big corrective right after 2016. We're trying a technology review to kind of hew to neither lane, but to actually say there is wonder and awe in new technologies. I mean, there are a whole host of major problems. The environment and the climate change course, very, very high on that list. It's not a short list, but it's very high on that list. And technologies in the magnitude of the human brain's imagination about how we can make change is something we want to continue to applaud and champion, and have people who are innovators under 35 get the kind of attention that can enable them to do even more and move even faster. But we need to be really smart about how we dig into the unforeseen consequences. And again, given that the policymakers largely are rather over their heads in certain cases, there's a really strong role for smart journalism to play to help us navigate these more challenging waters. It's more challenging to understand the impact of massive data sets and bias and algorithms and all of that than it might have been back when we were building the computer that wasn't going to be so massively networked to anyone in the world and enable me to set up a bot to do all kinds of nefarious things.
I think that's very important because there's a balance, right? You do want to continue to highlight the ways in which these new technologies are going to impact the world in very, very positive ways. But to your point, because you have access to deep expertise on your team, but also through the MIT network and beyond, you can kind of ask these questions, right? Like, okay, what happens if this technology is deployed at scale and is used in these 6 different ways you haven't thought about? And you challenge the industry to think a little deeper.
That's right. It's a question here that's come in, I think is relevant. The question is, how could AI help or impact public policy and a public's civic engagement?
Ooh, that's a good question.
That's a good question. It seems like I'm not aware of how that's being developed now, but it does make sense that there's as a tool to get greater insights into what a population is interested in.
I'll say a couple of things. I mean, they're not directly related to the question, but somewhat, I guess, relevant. Yesterday, I was at an event and we heard from Dr. Lynn Parker. She used to run the National Science Foundation in the U.S. government, and now, one of the agencies where they fund, state-of-the-art kind of innovations and research in academia, and they have an industry program as well. But she's now running the National AI Alliance or initiative. And so it was really interesting hearing from her the objectives of this initiative to push AI. And it's all about, supporting innovation, ensuring that the United States continues to be at the forefront of AI. And then also ensuring that there is access to AI opportunities from a job perspective. And I thought that was really interesting. So that was one thought. The other is, of course, the infrastructure bill, which is, $1 trillion+ dollars. And part of it actually has things that are related to driver monitoring and interior sensing, which is very specific to our work. But it's exciting to see some of these, demands for AI and types of technology like that, be mandated and supported by the government.
Can you say more about the parts of the infrastructure bill that relate to Smart Eye?
Yes. So a big part of Smart Eye's business is in the automotive industry, where we do driver monitoring So for example, detecting if a driver is distracted or drowsy. We also do interior sensing to understand what else is happening in the car. And so some safety related use cases include, a child left behind. Every year, about 50 or so infants get forgotten in the vehicle, and they often die of heat. So with a computer vision system, you can very easily detect if there's a child seat or if there's a child left in the vehicle, and you can alert, the drivers or the parents. And so that has made it into the infrastructure bill. There's actually a section in the bill that is requiring and mandating that vehicles, the next few years have systems to detect driver, distraction, drowsiness, even intoxication, which is really interesting. So there's a mandate for alcohol detection. So I think this is great. This will definitely, focus the efforts that companies like Smart Eye are working on, and hopefully we'll get to see the systems in vehicles soon. And I also think because it's mandated in that way, hopefully that will spur a conversation and even guidelines and best practices around privacy and, right? Like we're going to have cameras in our cars. Where does the data go? Does it go anywhere? Who has access to it? There's a lot of, privacy questions that come with that.
Yeah. I have a couple questions that have come in that I think there's a few that cluster around policy. There's a question about given that AI engagement algorithms on social media seem to be doing more harm than good, and we talked about the Facebook story that Technology Review published earlier this year, does government need to step in here, or can tech self-regulate? Now, relatedly, do you think regulations are a little bit behind when it comes to managing tech deficiencies? Why is it so challenging to update the laws to fit the tech world? And another question is, actually those two are related. I have another question kind of after that.
What do you think? Okay. Do you want to go first, or should I?
I don't personally think that tech can self-regulate. I don't. And I think it's because of the incentives are not, the incentives of a tech CEO, with respect, are to think about the shareholders. And I think we can, certainly there are companies that also think about the social impact, and the good governance is, I think, increasingly trying to come up with sort of whether it's a balanced scorecard kind of approach to that. But I do think that there are certain companies, and I'm not suggesting across all companies, but certain companies like a Facebook that do need to be regulated, that are not have not demonstrated an intention to self-regulate. That's my own view.
So then, what would your answer be then to regulation being typically a little bit behind? How do we address that?
Yeah, I think that's a massive problem. I think that's where the rubber meets the road. Okay, so if we say, okay, let's regulate it, then how are we going to ensure that these are by definition sort of cutting edge technologies, and there's not a lot of understanding of what the unforeseen consequences could be that are going to need to be regulated against. So I fear I don't have a great resolution for that. I think that is a big reason why we are where we are. And as I mentioned before, you look at the congressional hearings, and you can see, it's getting better. I would say that the most recent congressional hearings with Facebook, with Mark Zuckerberg, those were better than the ones, in which the question was, how do you make money? And the answer was, we run ads. I mean, that was a rather, I think, depressing. That was pretty shortly after the election in 2016. So I think things are certainly better, but I think that there's quite a bit more. There are some incredibly smart technologists within the policy making apparatus of the U.S. government, but there's a lot that's as having developed new technologies, that is on the really on the frontier of discovery. So what do you think, having been in the others, in that role?
Yeah, I mean, like you, I agree that we need thoughtful regulation, and I actually am a huge advocate of that. But I do worry that it's it's slow. And so I'm a big believer that we do need self-regulation as well. So it's almost like top down, but also bottoms up. I think it's incumbent on us as innovators and thought leaders to hold the bar high, even if it means, even if there is a trade-off between doing what's good and what's right, and perhaps, foregoing revenue. I'll give you one example. So the Partnership on AI Consortium, which was started by the tech giants a number of years ago in partnership with ACLU and Amnesty International. They've also invited a number of startups. So we were part of the FATE committee, which is the Fair, Accountable, Transparent, and Ethical committee. And we did a whole project where we focused on emotion AI. And we essentially had all these multi-stakeholders around the table, and we kind of try to articulate, okay, what are all the use cases of emotion AI and what are some of the unintended consequences? Yeah. So we try to be very proactive about it. And we literally ended up with a table where it was like, okay, uses in video conferencing, in retail, in robotics, in automotive. Here is where, here's the intended kind of application, and here's where it can go wrong. And then we tried to think about, again, very preemptively, how can we guard against these unintended consequences? It's hard. It's hard to prioritize time and mind share to focus on this when you were like, say, a small startup or, your company under a lot of tight deadlines and tight deadlines. And it's hard, but I think we need more of that. And I actually we've raised over $50 million of venture funding. And just in the recent few years, I've noticed that not all, but some investors have started asking us about, okay, what is your commitment to ethics? What is your ethics code of conduct? Which is awesome to see.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. What about, Rana, when you think of non-US competitors? This is something you've heard Mark Zuckerberg say a lot, the regulation that is, been discussed and kind of threatened, on Facebook. What about Facebook's ability to compete with TikTok or other non-US major fast-growing social media companies? Are we going to be in a situation where we're going to put US technology firms in a box that feels right for our society, and then find that they're not able to compete with other policy making, other governments' decisions around how to police their own technology, their sort of homegrown companies?
Yeah, I'll answer the question kind of again in the space I'm in, and then I'd love to hear your point of view as well. Our biggest competitor is a Chinese company, one or two companies based in China, and they have raised billions of dollars of funding, and they're very aligned with the Chinese government. Yeah. They have access to a lot of data. I think most of it is very China-centric, but they don't really have, an ethics code of conduct or a data privacy, consideration. What we found is that because a lot of our partners are, especially in the automotive industry, are global OEM companies that, they want to do the right thing. So they actually don't necessarily want to partner with the China-centric or the China companies, but it's interesting, and I think that is a big question, and we get asked that a lot, right? Like if we choose, for example, not to partner with the U.S. government to apply our technology in surveillance, is that hurting our ability as a country, right? Yeah, so it's definitely an ongoing debate. I still always, we have the debate, and I always land in the same position, which is I don't really want this technology at this stage without any regulation to be used in this way. It's just too dangerous, in my opinion. So yeah, what do you think?
Well, I think there's a question that kind of is where my brain goes that I'm going to read out, which is, should there be an international body that oversees the regulation of AI and other technologies across borders, like an intergovernmental entity? I think that's a brilliant idea. Yeah. I'm interested in whether you think that's actually pragmatic.
I think that's a brilliant idea too. And the EU just published an AI, an AI ethics framework, which is very interesting. And I think there's an opportunity for like-minded democracies to collaborate on something like that.
For it, of course.
Yeah.
There are parallels that have, this has happened.
Yeah. So that is interesting. I'm not aware of any conversations in that direction. Mm-hmm. So if anybody's listening in and, if there is kind of country, I don't know, a global, I don't know, initiative, let us know.
So Rana, we are running almost out of time, but I can't, forgive me for this, indulge me for this. I can't let the moment pass to ask I know that the topic of women in tech, girls in tech, is incredibly important to you. We are both, girl bosses here. And I would love to give you a chance to kind of talk about this as a passion, and help us understand, as people who care about tech, people who care about the society we live in, which means caring about both boys and girls. What do you think? What do you want us to know and be pushing for within our own organizations?
Yeah. So obviously, I'm as a CEO in the AI space, I'm a minority. I also grew up around the Middle East and found my way to the US. So that's kind of also been interesting. So yeah, I am very passionate about getting more women in tech and entrepreneurship. And I think there's a lot of things we can do, both on the founder side, so supporting more innovators and entrepreneurs who are female, but also on the funder side. I've become really interested in supporting and amplifying the voices of female investors, because we just need to invest in more diverse and overlooked ideas and founders. So I think it's those two pieces of the equation. I'm part of an organization called All Raise. I'm on the Boston Steering Committee. It's a national organization, nonprofit. And we support both female founders and female funders. So that's definitely something I'm very interested in. But again, back to you. I think the role of media in highlighting the story, because I think a big part of it is role models, right? If I can look at the success stories and I can see somebody who looks like me, then that's an amazing, that's an amazing message. So I think the role of media is really critical. So how do you think about it in your work?
Yeah, I mean, we think about it all the time. It's a challenging. It's challenging to find the kinds of the talent. There are some tremendously they're wonderful journalists who are women or who are minorities. And we're trying to amplify their voices, giving them opportunities and looking, actively seeking to bring more people to technology review, sort of move it away from that kind of traditional white male point of view. And I think the things that we've been talking about, the ethics and the unforeseen consequences, some of that you almost could have imagined that that's where we were going to end up without the right people telling the stories. How surprising is it really that we ended up with some of the outcomes we've found ourselves with? So we're trying really hard to fix that. We've got lots of jobs that we're always posting. So I would encourage any journalists watching to take a look at our site. I think I very much I'm very much a believer in kind of lead from the heart, be authentic. I don't really know how to lead differently, to be honest. And I don't know if that's because of who I am as a human being or because of my gender or anything else. But I do find that people respond to it. And I find that I have a lot of women and girls are, saying to me, I wish I'm aspiring to this type of career or leadership role.
And then how do you, when you, I guess, cover innovators, do you think, how intentional are you about telling the stories of, female founders or innovators or, entrepreneurs?
Yeah. So, so bearing in mind, I've been at the company now for about 6 years. My understanding is that it was very deliberate in the initial, some years ago, that it was, that the process would be prolonged in order to give more time to find, innovators who were strong, qualified to be, put into our list, that weren't just guys or white guys. And in the recent years, that has not been nearly so difficult. It's been like there's more and more just talent, and the more the list starts to look more, the more the composition of the list starts to look like the larger society, and the more we had tremendously qualified people applying to be put on the list. So we are always 50% at least women on the list. And that is not a difficult threshold to achieve. It's pretty straightforward at this point. We're really good at it, and we know how to dig into the networks and get referrals. So do you know anybody? Who do you think we should be keeping our eyes on, and that kinds of things.
Well, that's awesome because you're intentional about it, right? These kind of overlooked, underrepresented founders and innovators, they're there. It's just how intentional and how much work to put it in.
Yeah, and we also try to do that. We're thinking a lot about who are we profiling in the magazine, and who are we interviewing for story, in reporting the stories. And again, I'm not on the editorial side, but these are conversations that are taking place in really heavily in the editorial side of technology review. So they're thinking we need to make sure that when we're doing a story that we're not always talking to, because we're only going to hear stories that are about certain groups of people if we only talk to certain groups of people. So it's a pretty full on, very deliberate effort to make sure we're reporting on technology's impact on all of us. And that's something that we take really seriously. Rana, I am so grateful for you being here, and really appreciate the time to talk to you. And thank you again for joining us. We loved having you, and it was wonderful to have the entire audience here. Thank you all.
Thank you, Elizabeth. This was awesome. Thanks, everybody. Goodbye. Stay safe.
Bye.
I thought this was a great conversation between two very prominent female thought leaders. They had a rich discussion on women in tech, government regulation of tech, and ethics that was fascinating to listen to. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget to subscribe to the Human-Centric AI podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts for new episodes. We're also on social media, so please reach out to us on Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram to share any feedback you have on the show and weigh in on the discussion using hashtag Human-Centric AI podcast. Don't forget to rate us and comment with your feedback to help make the podcast more discoverable for others. Until next time, thanks for listening.